we do have the ability to mask. We absolutely do. And in fact, I often hear this, that this person or that person has a poker face. And that's true. You can have a poker face. You can have a face that you can master your ability to just hide. But there's no such thing as a poker body. You can hide some of the things in your face. But for those of us who are trained, and for those of you who are now privy to this information, what you're going to find is that there's actually very few of us that can hide information. There's very few of us that can be world-class actors where you can absolutely not read what they're saying, because if it's not in the face, it'll be in the hands. If it's not in the hands, it'll be in the feet and the legs. What we feel, what we think, what we intend will show up somewhere in your nonverbal communications.
He says that's his best offer. But is it? She says, "Oh, I agree." But does she? Yes, the interview went great. Or did it? He said he'd never do it again. But he did. Next time, you'll know. 80% of our communication is expressed non-verbally. 80%. Wouldn't you like to know what people are really saying to you? You should. The program you are now listening to is about to change your world and open you up to the exciting but mysterious world of nonverbal communication. And you're going to learn from the best in the business. Joe Navarro, a former FBI counterintelligence officer and a recognized expert on nonverbal behavior, explains in The Power of Body Language how to speed read people. He'll teach you to decode sentiments and behaviors, avoid hidden pitfalls, and look for revealing behaviors. He now unleashes this information to the layperson. The skills that Joe learned from the FBI Academy and used to successfully uncover terrorists, crack hardcore criminal cases, and expose the most devious liars will now be transferred to you. This is the most in-depth, comprehensive product ever produced on this enlightening topic. Armed with this powerful information, you'll be able to sit in a business meeting and know what your boss is really thinking and feeling, along with what your peers are thinking and feeling as well. You'll gain the ability to know what your children are really saying. As a salesperson, you'll now know the perfect time to close the deal. You'll learn how your own body language can influence your boss, family, friends, and even strangers. The possibilities are endless. Filled with examples from Joe's professional experience with the FBI, this definitive program offers a powerful new way to navigate your world. Your observance skills will be taken to a whole new level. So sit back, listen, and learn from one of the world's most powerful authorities of nonverbal communication, as the Nightingale Conant Corporation is very pleased to bring you Joe Navarro.
My name is Joe Navarro, and for 25 years I was a special agent with the FBI. During that time, I specialized in counterintelligence and counterterrorism. Basically, what I did, I was a spy catcher. During my career, I specialized in human behavior. Since I was in college, I had a keen interest in nonverbal communication, in body language, and I was afforded the opportunity by the FBI to pursue these studies on my own. And this gave me the opportunity not only to learn about nonverbal communications from some of the leading experts in the world on the topic, such as Paul Ekman and others, I also got to practice it as an investigator, as a counterintelligence agent, and utilized it to catch criminals, to catch spies, to catch terrorists, but more importantly, to prevent crime and to keep our nation safe. What I want to do here is share with you that which we have learned from research about nonverbal communications. and weave it in with my practical experience in the area of counterintelligence and counterterrorism. And in a way, make you, the listener, part of what I was part of, which is an observer. What I want to do is make you an expert observer in the same way that I learned to observe the world around me, in the same way that I learned to observe human behavior. I want to sensitize you to those very subtle behaviors that speak to us, that communicate so much information. I want to make you an observer in the same way that FBI agents are observers of the world around us. I want to share with you, number one, those things which are most important to look for. To be able to look at human behavior and not only, first of all, observe it, but then to be able to decipher it. Well, what does this mean? If the person is biting his lips or touching his neck or squinting his eyes or playing with one of the buttons on his shirt. What does that mean in context? And then how do we apply that? How do we apply that in our daily lives? If you're a mother at home and you see certain behaviors on the part of your children, if you're a father and you're having a conversation with one of your children and you see certain behaviors in them when talking about particular subjects, or if you're at work and you are at a business meeting and you find yourself confronted with individuals and each one is communicating something to you nonverbally. What does that mean? One of the joys that I have found about nonverbal communication is how much richer it makes our lives. It truly makes our lives more nuanced. It makes our lives more fulfilling. It makes our lives, in a way, more exciting because you're able to see things that very few other people actually see. You're able to sense things as they're happening before other people sense them. It allows you to interpret the thoughts, the feelings, and the intentions of other people in real time. And it gives you that insight that very few of us really have. But we can learn to expand. We can learn to grow. We can learn to experience once we're taught, once we are imbued with this knowledge. This is something that we can all do. If there's one thing that I've learned in the study of nonverbal communication is that we can always become better at it. This is something that doesn't require a lot of hard work. It just requires our attention. And once someone comes along and shares these secrets with us, and we discover, oh, this is what a lip bite means. This is why we touch our neck and so forth. Then light is cast on behaviors that previously were observed, but we really didn't know what it meant or what it might suggest. So I hope that you'll enjoy this adventure. I wanted it to be an adventure of discovery as we explore how the brain motivates us, how the brain reacts to the world around us, how the brain is constructed to deal with our world, and how we communicate that world, that environment, how we communicate our perceptions of the world around us through our nonverbal communications. Once we learn the secrets of nonverbal communications, we are then able to better interpret the world around us. The beauty of nonverbals is that it has really been with us for tens of thousands, if perhaps even millions of years. Even if we were to go back to the early hominids, they communicated primarily nonverbally. Scientists tell us that approximately 90,000 years ago, This is when we began to actually speak. Our species was a latecomer to verbal communication. So prior to that, we were primarily involved in communicating non-verbally. And those of you who have pets will notice that your pets react to you non-verbally. They don't really speak English, although they can learn certain words and associate them with commands. But in my own life, where I've had cats and dogs, my cat would sense when I was ill, and I'm sure that it sensed that I was ill from my nonverbal behavior, from the way that I walked into the room, from my lack of activity, from being in bed, and so forth. In the same way that dogs look at us and they can immediately tell if we're happy or if we're sad or if something's troubling us or if we perceive danger. Our dogs do the same thing. And in fact, we humans are very receptive to this if we are sensitive to nonverbal communications. Now, one of the things that has happened over time is that we have placed so much reliance on the spoken word that we have forgotten how powerful nonverbal communications truly are. Approximately, and depending on the situation, anywhere from 60 to 80% of communication is nonverbal. Now, those of you who are parents, and I am a parent, will validate this, that first year that the baby comes into the world, those communications are nonverbal. And by the way, when we talk about verbal and nonverbal, nonverbal is anything that is not an exact word. And a baby is born, comes into the world, basically prepared, hardwired to communicate two things: comfort and discomfort. And we're going to be talking about that. But the fact that we come prepared to communicate nonverbally gives us an insight into that which we all share. We all share this commonality that has been with us for a very long time. And that is that when all else fails, we have this innate ability, no matter where we grow up, no matter what language we speak, to communicate nonverbally. And we're going to capitalize on this knowledge because it's very easy to look at, for instance, the dictionary and say, well, there's 3,000 pages in that dictionary, there's upwards of 400, 600,000 words, and they all have meaning and so forth. And yet, for interpersonal communication, which is basically what we do every day, whether you're a woman and you're running a large company, or you are a construction worker and you're trying to bid on a new site, primarily what we do as a species is two things. We observe and we communicate. And I'm going to repeat that because this often has come up with my students in college, and they said, well, what does an FBI agent really do? Yes, we make arrests, we knock down doors, we go after bad people, we catch spies and terrorists and so forth. But when you look at primarily what we do, and when you look at primarily what any business person does, is number one, they observe. Now, as an FBI agent, I used to observe criminals and spies and so forth. But that's no different than someone who is tasked with maybe looking at the stock market, looking at what's going on with their employees, or looking at a patient. If you're a physician, if you're a firefighter, you're looking at the fire. You are making observations. So primarily what we do is we observe, and then we communicate. Now, we communicate in a variety of ways. We can communicate through hand signals, through messages, through action. Activity becomes a form of communication. But as a species, primarily what we do is observe and communicate. And if we remember this, we can then look and say, well, how can we better this? How can we better what we do? To me, it's quite simple. if anywhere from 60 to 80% of all communication is nonverbal, then one of the things that obviously we can do is learn how to truly read nonverbal behavior. Look at what behaviors really say about us, what they really are communicating about what we're thinking, feeling, or intending, and then using that information to maximize that task which we have before us. And that task can be, we want to be a better parent. That task can be, I want to be a better father, a better mother, or I want to be a better manager. I want to be a better physician. I want to be a better attorney. I want to be a better banker. I want to be someone who can do much better in the area of sales. Wherever there is interpersonal communications, this is paramount because so much of what we do, so much of what the research tells us is based on our ability to observe and to communicate, and that communication is primarily non-verbally. So knowing that anywhere from 60 to 80% of communication is nonverbal, and that's just on a day-to-day basis, we immediately see, number one, the efficacy of being able to observe, interpret, and utilize this information. We can also see the profitability of it. And I'll give you an example that I had a few years ago where I was hired to sit down with negotiators in Europe and watch the negotiations as they were taking place. And across from us was an attorney who was fairly close to the chest in revealing information as to what his company wanted to do or not do. One of the things that we did was we insisted that the contract be read paragraph by paragraph in real time so that we could discuss issues as they came up. And as a particular paragraph was being read, I noticed that the opposing counsel, the attorney representing the other company, his lips were pursed in the same way that we see young children pursing their lips when you ask them to taste something that they don't particularly care for. So I immediately passed a note to the attorney I was working with, and I said, there's something in this paragraph that this attorney has issues with. And sure enough, we went back and revisited that, and we did it right there. And when it was all said and done, my attorney was very grateful for this because he said, had they taken this issue back to the company to deal with, this whole deal may have been protracted, it may have been delayed, and by looking at this, we were able to deal with it here, today, and now, number one, but more importantly, we were able to convince him that if we move forward on this deal today, that we were willing to bring this to immediate closure, and in the end, it saved us in excess of $10 million. So here we have a nonverbal behavior, the pursing of the lips, which would have been missed had we only been listening to the words of the contract. But in fact, this nonverbal tell was communicating to us that this individual had, number one, an issue with this particular paragraph or was considering something alternatively. So this is the kind of thing that I want to share with you. This is the kind of thing that I want to teach you. How to observe human behavior, decode it properly, and then how to apply it in real time so that it then becomes useful to you. Whether you are working for yourself, whether you're a parent, if you are in the health profession, if you're in the legal profession, no matter what profession you're in, you can use this kind of information. Now, when we talk about human behavior, we have to look at what's driving this. And when it comes to nonverbal communications, we have to talk about the brain. Now, I find the brain is fascinating. And to me, it is truly miraculous how the brain works. The average person looks at the brain and they say, well, we have a brain. And in essence, we do. We have a brain. But the brain is really composed of three very distinct areas. And I want to talk to you about this, not because I want to have a class on anatomy, but I think it's important that once we understand what the different areas of the brain control and drive, when we see behavior, then we will be able to better interpret those behaviors, knowing what science tells us about the human brain. The human brain is a marvel of engineering. And it's truly a marvel because no computer can do what our brain can do. Our brain can, in real time, assess the world around us. It can look at the world. It can sense imagery through our eyes. It can sense heat through our skin. It can sense wind through a variety of cells on our surfaces. It does so many miraculous things while at the same time monitoring our own internal organs and looking at things such as how much water is in our body. Are we dehydrated? Are we cool enough? Are we warm enough? Are we content? Is the noise too loud? Are our thoughts happy thoughts or negative thoughts and so forth? All this goes on within the brain. So in many ways, it's a miraculous system. And it's a system that has really evolved to maximize our experience on this planet and to keep us alive. Now, scientists tell us that there's really three parts, three main features to the brain. The first part is our more primitive brain. Sometimes it's referred to as the aquatic/reptilian brain. And this is the part of the brain which is actually very interesting because it runs our hearts, it runs our lungs, it runs our digestive system and so forth. It keeps our organism alive. And this is the part of the brain that, for instance, if you're injured in the head, you could live in a persistent vegetative state. In other words, you are not doing any high-order thinking. You're not processing information. Your body is merely existing. The lungs and the heart are working because of this very primitive aspect of our brain, which is associated with the brainstem. We don't really need to think about that too much. Fortunately, it works quite efficiently. It's worked very well for tens of thousands, millions of years. We then have a very elegant system, which is primarily what I will be talking about, called the limbic system. Now, it's called the limbic system because of the Latin word limbus, which means the border or the margin. And the limbic system exists sort of in the center of the brain area. This is a system that deals with the world around us. And it's designed primarily to keep us alive. Now, the limbic system is composed of several parts. The hippocampus, and the reason they called it the hippocampus was when they first looked at it, they were sort of fascinated by how much it looked like a seahorse. And so the early scientists decided to just call it the hippocampus. We now know that the hippocampus is the primary place where we rest most of life experiences. This is where the central repository of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and primarily things that are emotional. So when we touch a stove and it's hot, that information is registered in this wonderful little area called the hippocampus, and it keeps us from doing it again. And this is also the area where, for instance, we keep information regarding where we've been, places we've traveled to, and so forth. In fact, the hippocampus is so fascinating that in the last 6 years it's been studied. And in one particular study that I'm familiar with, they decided to look at the brains of taxi drivers in London. And in London, to be a taxi driver, you actually have to study for several years. And you have to memorize areas and locations and so forth. And what they found was that the before and after of these individuals, they found that the hippocampus actually grows. This is one area of the brain that we can always feed with new information. So the more you travel, the more places you go to, the more experiences you have, the more you study. This is one area of the brain that actually expands. And 20, 30 years ago, people thought, well, the brain size and so forth, it's really fixed. And actually, we now know that it's fairly plastic, that you can add to these experiences. So the hippocampus stores this positive and negative information. And we have other parts of the limbic brain. We have the amygdala. And actually, there's two of them, which responds to the world around us, especially anything negative, be it food that's putrid, something that doesn't smell quite right, or be it something that threatens us in any way. When someone stands too close to us, you're at a money machine, you're at an ATM, and someone steps too close and you turn around real quick to see who that is, or you sense that somebody's following you and so forth. It's the amygdala which actually does this rather elegant calculus and determines, is this person a threat to me? It's also this part of the brain, the limbic area, which looks at things such as a friendly face or an unfriendly face, a friendly gesture or an unfriendly gesture, and it does this subconscious addition and subtraction and tells your cognitive brain, there's some issue here, or there's something you need to attend to. So we have the hippocampus, we have the amygdala, but we also have other structures within the limbic system. We have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, all these features. I guess the most important thing for us to remember is that all these features within the limbic system are designed to preserve us, to keep us alive, to react to the world around us in real time. There is no high order thinking that takes place here. The limbic system is reactive. I'm going to repeat that because most people forget this. The limbic system is reactive. It is not cognitive. It doesn't sit there and think for you. It reacts to the world around us. It does it in real time, and it does it subconsciously. You don't have to be aware constantly of certain things. If someone violates your space, the limbic system will kick in, even though you're reading a book. It will kick in and warn you, there's something going on here. And the beauty of the limbic system is this, is that not only does it react to the world around us, and not only does it warn us of potential danger, and it does so subconsciously, but it is also our emotional brain. And it's often called that, the limbic system or the emotional brain. And this is the seat of all of our emotions. Love, happiness, excitement, when we feel up, down, when we feel anger, and so forth. It's all ensconced in this wonderful area, this truly magnificent area known as the limbic brain. Now, the other wonderful feature about the limbic system is its honesty. When it comes to the brain and the various parts of the brain, we can say that the limbic system is truly the honest brain. It is the brain that doesn't lie to us. It doesn't know how to lie. Its responsibility is merely procreation, emotions, and to keep us alive. This is the part of the brain in fact, that control so much of our human behavior. And I'll give you an example of it. I was recently out west, and I stepped to the edge of the Grand Canyon. Now, when I was in the FBI, I was also on the SWAT team. And in fact, I was the rappel master. So I was in charge of hooking up ropes, going over buildings, and descending using ropes and so forth. So I'm used to height. And even with all my experience, I found myself inching ever closer, not taking bold steps, but inching ever closer to the edge of the Grand Canyon to look down. It's breathtaking. There's nothing else like it on this planet. And yet, I found myself just ever so slight steps moving closer and closer. And then it dawns on me, this is my limbic brain. This is the beauty, this is the elegance of the limbic system. It's designed to protect us. No matter how confident we are, it's saying, look, there's a big ledge. It's a mile down. It's a danger to you. I don't care how experienced you are. I want you to take it easy, and I want you to move ever so slowly towards that edge. And this is why I say this is the most honest part of our brain, because our limbic brain doesn't know how to lie to us. It tells us there's a threat, and here's how you're going to deal with that threat. And I'll be referring back and forth to the limbic system. And then we have the neocortex, or the new brain. And this is the part of the brain, the frontal part of our brain, the upper casing area of the brain. This is the thinking part of the brain. This is where the high order cognition takes place. This is where we do the math. This is where they do the science, the chemistry. This is where we do the weaving. This is where we know how to build a square box, a building, how to draw, how to paint, and so forth. This is the brain that allows us to create, but it's also the lying, the deceptive brain. This is the brain that says, when the phone rings and someone answers it, tell them we're not home. This is the part of the brain that says, I'll get back to you. This is the deceptive brain. We're going to spend very little time on this part of the brain precisely because of that. Because it can muster words that can deceive us. So we're going to concentrate in the area of the brain that is primarily responsible for nonverbal communications. And that is the limbic system. And the beauty of it is that it generates honest, truthful behaviors that we can use every day to interpret what people are thinking, feeling, or intending. Now, the question is often asked, well, what about culture? And how does culture influence nonverbal communications? Well, I have to tell you, having been born outside the United States and having traveled to over 30 countries in the last 30 years, I can tell you that culture definitely influences nonverbal communications. But culture primarily influences things that are emblematic. I'll give you an example. The way we say come here is different than perhaps the way that somebody might say come here nonverbally with their hands in, say, Venezuela or Brazil, where we might do it palm up and we sort of flap our fingers towards us with the palm up. In other cultures, they may do it hands down or palm down. And so it looks different. The way we say, for instance, stop with our hands may be different than in other cultures where they may just use, instead of the palm of the hands face out, in other cultures, They may just move the hand side to side. For instance, in Japan, when you want someone to move out of your way, street vendors and so forth, you don't want them to come near you. You merely wave your hand in front of your face, and they get it. But we in the West don't do that. So these are emblems. These are cultural nonverbals that are associated with what we are intending. When we say, oh, everything's okay, we raise our thumb up. So it's a positive gesture. Well, there's cultures where this thumb up behavior is actually very negative. It's considered a phallic symbol. What we're going to talk about here in this program are the behaviors that are driven by the limbic brain. These behaviors are, in fact, universal. They are seen all over the world because they're part of our emotional brain. They're part of the limbic system. So we can take greater reliance on these behaviors precisely because they're hardwired into our brain. Now, when we look at human behavior, we have to realize that all behavior is controlled by the brain. Unless you're suffering from some sort of mental deficit or you have Tourette's syndrome or some other medical anomaly associated with the brain, all behaviors are driven by the brain. Our arms don't do things independently. Our eyes don't do things independently. Everything that we do is controlled by the brain. So as you're listening to this, if you are at home or driving in your car and so forth, your brain is assessing the world around you, and it's telling you to do different things. Keep your hands on the wheel, scratch yourself, maybe you're biting your lip or something, or you're twisting your neck to stretch and so forth. All of these things are being controlled by the brain. And in fact, when I give lectures, I can, with confidence, look at the audience and say, okay, here's an individual who's bouncing his leg. He wants to move things along, or he's pacifying himself, soothing himself. Here's someone whose head is tilted, so they're being very receptive to my message. All these things are controlled by the brain, and they manifest through our bodies. And I give them the example of, well, what would happen if I were to bring a tiger or a lion into the room? And this gets us into the next phase of our study of the brain, and that is, how does the brain react to the world around us? And one of the things from an evolutionary standpoint that has transpired is that the brain has really a limited protocol for dealing with the world around us. Imagine us 120, 140, 180,000 years ago. Most of us, according to scientists, lived in the savannas of Africa. And there were plenty of threats there. There were lions, tigers, all sorts of feline predators, as well as snakes and so forth. How did we learn to survive? How was it that we were able to get past that? Well, we developed a repertoire that was actually very successful. And the repertoire was this. The procedure that our brain developed was based on 3 actions. And the first one was to freeze. Now, I know most of you have heard of the fight or flight response. In fact, I grew up hearing about the fight or flight response. The problem with that is that if it was really truly fight or flight, we would all be bruised and exhausted. In fact, our brain is far more caring of us. And so it developed the freeze, flight, fight response. So when there's any threat to our survival, whenever we feel extremely uncomfortable, whenever there is something that leaves us nonplussed, where we just don't know how to act and so forth, the first response that we have is to just freeze, to not move. And it serves several purposes. First of all, we know that predators have an orientation reflex. So they will orient towards anything that moves. So your lions, your tigers, and so forth, they have the chase, trip, bite sort of protocol. And it's based on they see movement, they chase it. Well, we went the opposite way. We figured it out that if we individually or collectively just all of a sudden stop and freeze, chances are we wouldn't be observed. And I certainly saw this as a SWAT team operator where we would go out on assignment, and if there was a threat, one of the first things that we would do is just to freeze so that our lack of movement would not attract any attention, but we could also better assess, well, what is the threat? And so we developed this freeze, flight, fight response. And you often see this with individuals. I used to see it as an FBI agent when I would interview someone. And you would see them sitting in the chair as they're being interviewed, and they'd look like they were sitting on an ejector seat. Their hands are frozen, gripping the arms of the chair, and you see this look of fright on their face, and they're not moving. And as we say, this is a clue. There's something at issue here because the freeze response has kicked in so significantly that they're literally unable to move. And we often see this too, for instance, in bank robberies, where the bad guys come in with weapons drawn, and you see the employees and you see other people at the bank, and they just freeze right where they're at. They don't move away, they don't run. Their first reaction is to freeze. This is millions of years old, and it's designed to preserve us. So we're going to talk a little later about the freeze response and how we see that non-verbally. The next response that we have is the flight response. And obviously in modern society, rarely do we have to flee from something dangerous. Maybe a dog that's chasing us or a school bully and so forth. But as adults, we don't really flee from the conference room or flee from a contract negotiations or from a patient. What we see is an extension of the limbic brain which says anytime something threatens you or is negative, I want you to distance yourself from it. So our flight response does several things. It can prepare us to run. It'll increase adrenaline. It'll dump all these wonderful chemicals into our bloodstream so that we can sprint away. It even releases cortisol, which, if we get cut, keeps us from bleeding excessively. But in our modern world, the way we see it is this distancing, this flight response. The modern equivalent is distancing. So the example that I gave you where I'm approaching the Grand Canyon wall, it's saying, slow down. I'll let you get close, but not too close. And in fact, what I found was it allowed my head to lean over, but it wouldn't allow my feet to come near the edge. My feet then became driven and controlled by the limbic brain, which said, distance yourself. I will not allow you to get that close. I'll let you look over the ledge, but I won't let your feet get near that. And so we distance ourselves this way. You often see the purity of this with children. You'll have a parent who says to a child, well, go kiss Uncle Harry. And as a child approaches Uncle Harry, he leans way over. The feet are far away, and you see this very difficult or painful sort of transaction where the child, in fact, does give Uncle Harry a kiss, but the main part of the body and definitely the feet are kept away. This is the limbic brain saying, I will not allow you to go near anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And so this flight response in the terms of modern day, because we no longer live in the savannah, says to us, distance yourself from anything that might harm you. And we'll talk more about that, obviously, throughout this. And as I said, these are programmed responses. We don't have to think about them. We don't have to even be very aware of them. This is a subconscious response that the limbic system has built in to protect us and to deal with the world around us. Then lastly, the third response is the fight response. Now, obviously, if someone jumps us and grabs us, our final response is to fight this individual off. Whether it's a mugger or if it's a dog coming after us, we're going to kick, we're going to punch, we're going to do whatever it takes to get away from this individual. And that's our last survival response. In modern day living, hopefully, most of us do not engage in fighting. This is obviously very primitive behavior. But the way that it shows in, let's say, the corporate world is it manifests by arguing, by saying things that are really nasty, ad hominem attack, being impertinent, creating confusion, any number of things that we humans do to, in essence, fight, to make another person extremely uncomfortable and to make them want to flee from us. So throughout our discussion, we're going to be talking about the freeze, flight, fight response. And the most important thing for you to remember is this. This has been with us for millions of years. It is a subconscious system. It's elegant. It's designed to protect us. It has worked for a very long time. And many of the behaviors that we see between individuals are part and parcel of this freeze, flight, fight response, especially when something is negative. But before we get into any more specifics about the freeze, flight response, I next want to talk to you about something that I find profound, and that is the limbic brain's response to the positive things that we experience. So we've talked about the freeze, flight, fight response as our primary responses to things that are negative. Now I want to talk to you about probably something even more majestic, and that's our ability to deal with positive things. Now, we would think that positive events, positive emotions are dealt with by our cognitive brain, but in fact, they are also dealt with by our limbic system. When a child comes into the world, it basically knows how to communicate two things: comfort or contentment and discomfort. So when it's hungry, he or she cries. When it's sad, the baby will look sad. When the baby is happy, you see the nonverbal displays of happiness. When the baby is soiled, you see the discomfort displays there and so forth. In a very simple way, a baby is programmed to communicate to the mother what the baby is thinking or feeling as a result of how the baby itself is processing the world around them. So 1 minute they may be hungry, and then that's taken care of. The next minute maybe they need to suckle and pacify, or they need to be burped, and so forth. And the baby learns to communicate through a very binary sort of way. I'm either content and happy, or I'm unhappy. I am either comfortable or uncomfortable. And it contributes to the relationship. The baby actually contributes to the relationship with its mother by doing some very positive things, which we're going to talk about because they're very important to us as we study nonverbal behaviors. One of the interesting things I found when I first started studying nonverbal communications in the 1970s was how little had been done to incorporate these early years of nonverbal communications in the study of nonverbal behavior. And in fact, I find that by looking at the behaviors of the child, which are truly honest behaviors, we can use this information as we study nonverbal behavior to help us to put it into context, to help us in deciphering nonverbal communications, and then to put it to usefulness in our daily lives. So a baby quickly learns this system of communication by displaying comfort and discomfort. And we as students of nonverbal communications must keep this in mind, that primarily what we are communicating is displays of comfort and discomfort. And if we use that as a sort of foundation, as we examine nonverbal communications and we ask ourselves, what am I witnessing here? What am I seeing? I want you to keep comfort and discomfort in the back of your minds, because what you're going to find, and this has been the basis of much of my research, my observations, and my writings and teachings, has been that much of what we see every day are emblems and behaviors associated with comfort and discomfort. So one of the things that a child does to enhance its relationship with the mother is to give displays of comfort. And what we find from the research is that, for instance, babies that smile more, babies that have very relaxed faces, babies that, for instance, arch their eyebrows, that have very relaxed eyes, babies that tilt their faces and so forth, tilt their heads, get more attention, have better positive responses than babies that don't. And so a child, a little boy, a little girl, just days old, quickly learns that to garner the parent's attention, they can rely on certain behaviors that will keep the parent more focused on them. So they learn to giggle, they learn to smile, they learn to arch their eyebrows and make their eyes big. They learn to, in fact, mimic behaviors that the mother or the father may do. Within hours, literally within hours, within about 6 to 8 hours, babies begin to respond to facial cues from the parents. And so when the mother smiles, the baby begins to smile, or it tries to smile, but it recognizes fairly much that this is something positive. Now, these behaviors, obviously they're cute, but these are the foundational behaviors of things that we see later on. Courtship behavior between men and women is really based on nonverbal communications. It's about the smile. It's about the arching eyebrows, which garner attention. It's about the tilted head, which says, I'm interested in you, and so forth. Where did we learn that? It's not so much where did we learn that, it's where did we begin to use those behaviors when we were babies. And we must never forget these very honest, these very truthful behaviors, because they communicate that we are in harmony. By the baby mimicking the mother, and the mother mimicking some of the facial behaviors of the child, we begin a long process of synchrony, of harmony, that follows us well into adulthood. The reason that military officers, when they're marching, look so well is because they're marching in synchrony. When we see a couple and we see that they are truly happy, we see that they are truly happy because their nonverbal behaviors are in synchrony. They walk at the same pace. They look at each other with the same gladdened faces, the same relaxed faces. This synchrony, this harmony, was first exercised within hours of birth. And we take this with us. So when we begin the study of nonverbal communications, we have to always go back to that very beginning where we learn these wonderful nonverbal displays that told us that there are certain things that we do to show that we are contented, that we are happy, that we have comfort. And there are other things that we do to demonstrate that we have discomfort, that we're not happy, that we're not contented. And based on those things, really the world revolves around us. And what I want to do is share these things with you, make you think about your own nonverbals, and make you realize just how ancient and primitive these behaviors are, and yet they're supremely important. And I told you in the beginning that this isn't difficult to do. We just have to think about it. So I want you to be thinking about these behaviors. And we'll come back and talk about these early primitive behaviors of the child, and yet how powerful they are. When we think about sales, one of the first things we're taught is if you're going to sell something, try smiling. Well, the baby learned that within hours, and the baby learned that the more it smiles or she smiles at the mother, the more time the mother is willing to spend with the baby. And this has a contrasting effect because one of the things that we find is when babies are ill or there's some sort of mental disorder where the baby can't smile or is so uncomfortable that it has either reluctance to or is incapable of giving these displays of comfort. Unfortunately, the record shows that the mothers or the caregivers really don't spend enough time with that child. And part of it has to do with the fact that there is no synchrony. There is not that reward of the baby smiles, therefore I smile. And it's rather unfortunate. But this is one of the things that scientists have learned from bad relationships and from bad institutions where these children, because of mental disorders and so forth, did not get enough attention. And part of it had to do with this inability to communicate. So for us, we want to take all of this into account, that our limbic brain not only deals with the negative things that are around us in this world, but also with the positive things. And those positive things begin at birth, and they stay with us all our lives. Our limbic brain also has a repertoire of things that it does for positive emotional events. The limbic brain knows how to transmit information non-verbally when we're feeling good, when we feel happy, when we're excited, when we are very calm and at ease. And so we have the ability to communicate what we're thinking and how we're reacting to negative things, but also very positive things. And we will talk about that as we go along. And lastly, leaving this area of the brain, I want to talk about something that the brain, the limbic brain in particular, does to help us along. And I find it's quite fascinating because it does this by incorporating the physical body. Now, technically, it could do this all within the brain, but for millions of years, it found that by incorporating the body, it actually helps. And that is, notice that from the time a baby is born, it usually begins to either suck its own thumb or it will seek some other sort of pacifier, be it breastfeeding or in the modern sense where we have pacifiers. One of the things we find is that when we have positive experiences, our limbic brain contributes to that and says to the body, do something to add to this positive experience. And you often see this, as I used to see it, with my own daughter, who would be reading a book, very comfortable in her chair, and she would take a few strands of hair and she would twirl it with her fingers. So here's a situation where she's enjoying a book. Her thinking brain is off somewhere imagining something about Peter Pan or whatever she was reading about at the time. And yet her brain is saying to her, add to this, contribute to this by playing with your hair, which has a very soothing, pacifying effect. And our brain does this quite often, many times during the day and in many ways. And I'm going to be talking about pacifying behaviors. Now, in the nonverbal scientific literature, this is often referred to as adapters, adaptive behaviors. But I find that the term is a little difficult to remember and a little difficult, frankly, to deal with. So I often refer to it as pacifiers, which is really what it is. We suck our thumbs to deal with any external stress. In fact, I remember years ago, I was at the university giving a speech, and as we're walking by a dorm, there was a young lady, college age. She was preparing for a test, and she actually was sucking her thumb in preparation for a test that day, and I'm not sure she realized she was under so much stress that she was actually sucking her thumb. So we have these pacifiers that we use every day, and they can be any number of things. Men sometimes grab their earlobes and massage it. It could be the pulling of hair on your arm, the touching of your fingers, or wiping your hands on your foreleg and so forth. There's any number of pacifiers that we use for a variety of reasons to either enhance our good experience, and this is why we often enjoy a good massage when we're trying to relax, or we see pacifiers to deal with stress. So there's some sort of stressful response, and then we have some sort of pacifying activity that our brain literally forces us to do to then calm us down. And we're going to talk about that later. So let me recap some major things here for you. All behavior is governed by our brain. And when we look at nonverbal behaviors, when we look at nonverbal communications, which are about 60 to 80% of what we communicate socially. And by the way, when you think about lovemaking, that's 100% nonverbal. We realize the importance of nonverbal communication on a day-to-day basis. And we realize that we're very fortunate that we have this limbic brain, which is very honest, which is designed to protect us, to keep us from danger, to react to the world around us in real time. There are no delays. And that we have a repertoire of things that we do to enhance our life experiences, to demonstrate and further our comfort, or to demonstrate and deal with discomfort. And so these are the things that we will be talking about throughout our sessions as we discuss and explore the beauty, the elegance, the really magnificent study of nonverbal communication.